Alrighty, welcome back to Shop and Ball. I am Aaron Chow, accompanied by my co-host John Harris. As always, we are back to talk NFL, of course, and obviously today we are talking NFC North and also sharing our a couple more of our top 5 positional rankings in the offensive tackle and offensive guards. So we're doing 5 for each of those. Not doing side specific, just in general. I'm sure we'll have some points and reasons as to why our rankings will be the way they are. But nonetheless, exciting day today too, as well. It was technically today was cut day as the day we're recording on August 27th. So some interesting little moves. I'm not going to talk about them because for the most part it wasn't anything big. Like once again, as of right now, I'm knocking on wood. Maybe I have a mid podcast, but like no Ayuk trade or of the sort. So
I will say though, because I am a Cowboys fan, we signed CD Lamb, so that's over with. Just glad to get it done.
Yeah, once again, that's huge. And yeah, ironically, luckily we didn't do the Dallas Cowboy episode or the NFC East yet, so we didn't have to waste any time in airwaves talking about that and speculating. Even though you had a good feeling anyway as an experienced Cowboy fan.
My take would have been exactly what was happened, which is what happens every year with the Cowboys when it comes to the extensions. Not to go too long about them, but Jerry does all this like BS talk, and remember when Zeke held out and he was in Mexico and there's just all this drama, and then all of a sudden the player signs and it's like a top 5 highest paid player at like their position ever. So Jerry does all this stuff, and then by the time you get close to the deadline, he just gives them everything they wanted. So yeah. And that's exactly what happened here. So,
yeah, and I have textual proof if anyone wants to try to call cap on John, because you have said it in a group chat. So, I have. Even before this all happened. So, anyway, obviously that's another episode, another time that will be coming soon. But anyway, let's talk NFC North, aka my division per se. We're going to obviously start from the top down from last year's results. So, starting with the Detroit Lions, they went 12-5. In case you forgot, and Lions fans cover your ears at this what I'm about to say next, but they lost that tough game against the Niners in the NFC Championship. I forget, was that in Detroit or was that the Niners home?
It was in San Francisco, because I remember we actually were the 2nd seed, and that was because we beat Detroit, even though we were tied on record. So they were the 3rd seed because San Francisco was number 1. So
understood. Okay, so anyhow. 12-5, obviously that game. But last year they went 12-5. I mean, a lot of people had them as a kind of a rise up candidate, and we all like the pieces, and it showed. So now it's a matter of, it feels like staying competitive. It's not always easy to stay up there. But anyway, so in regards to their roster, though, some losses over the offseason are guard Jonah Jackson, wide receiver Josh Reynolds, and then on the defensive side, they had lost Jerry Jacobs as well as cornerback Cameron Sutton. And then in terms of safeties, they lost a trio of safeties, starting with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, as well as Will Harris and Tracy Walker. And then in terms of additions, they did bring in veteran guard Kevin Zeitler, as well as defensive tackle DJ Reader on defense, and then went with another two cornerbacks in free agency, and Carlton Davis from the Bucks and Amik Robertson, I believe from the Raiders, if I remember that correctly. And then lastly, in the draft, they continued to attack that secondary in terms of talent, because they went with Terrion Arnold out of Alabama late in the first round at pick 24. And then Oswell went in the second round, defensive back Ennis Rakestraw Jr. out of Missouri. Granted, I said defensive back because if I remember correctly, too, from his tape, Picano could be either or in terms of safety corner. I'm not up on Lions camp, so who knows if they've already kind of pigeonholed him into a position or doing both or whatnot. Anyhow, John, what were your thoughts on the Lions off season and how this season may go?
Ultimately, the big thing that really stood out to me was clearly the attempt to reconcile the secondary, because for the Lions, the secondary was a big problem last year. Obviously, they were a fantastic team, and one has to wonder if their secondary was maybe a little better, do they even go to that Super Bowl? Does Brock Purdy and that offense not able to do what they did in the second half and make such a large comeback? And do you force them? Because when, the Niners were down that big, obviously McCaffrey's still going to be a threat through the air, but you're forcing them to pass. And so that's when your secondary becomes much more of a factor, as opposed to, being able to try and stop the run, which, the Lions were pretty good at last year. So clearly the secondary was a problem, and clearly they tried heavily to fix it. I like the addition of Carlton Davis. He was pretty solid for Tampa Bay throughout the years. You and I, we both weren't the biggest fans of Terrion Arnold out of Alabama. We did think there were better corners there. But at the same time, still a great corner. I still think he was a first or second round pick ultimately. And so solid selection nonetheless. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was he the second corner taken in the draft?
I'm not sure. Let me look that up real fast.
Sorry, the only reason I ask is because, once again, I'm pretty sure it was the Eagles, right, who took...
they took Quinyon Mitchell.
Yeah, Quinyon Mitchell first of the corners, correct?
I'm double checking.
Did Quinyon Mitchell go
after
at
22,
him?
Yes. Terrion was right after him, 2 picks later. Because technically this was, I guess, Dallas's pick that Detroit grabbed him.
Yeah, because we traded back.
And then Nate Wiggins was third later.
Yeah, there was Nate Wiggins, there was Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry, a couple other corners that went after him. And ultimately, once again, I can't remember exactly what our lists were, at least for the draft, in terms of like where you ranked corners. But I personally had Cooper DeJean a little higher. But that's nitpicking. That's also just our personal preferences. I don't know. I'm not a huge Lions fan, so I can't sit here and say maybe Terrion Arnold specifically fits the scheme a little bit better. And I will say, because they did hold, they held the draft in Detroit, right? I'm not tripping on that. I'm pretty sure they did. Sorry, I'm asking you a lot of questions that long time ago that this happened, but I'm pretty sure they held it in Detroit, and I'm pretty sure when he walked out on that stage, the fans went nuts. Or maybe it was in Tennessee. I don't know. It's irrelevant.
It was in
Regardless,
Detroit.
I'm pretty
It was
sure
in Detroit.
It was in Detroit. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Tennessee was the year before. Yeah, so I remember when he walked out on that stage, the fans went nuts for him, and he had a really cool reaction. So at least in terms of tugging on the heartstrings and kind of becoming a little bit of a fan of him, he did win me over, at least in that moment. But then they weren't satisfied there. They get Enius Rankstraw Jr. in the second round. They added Amik Robinson, like you said, and then even maybe a little underrated in terms of how it could help the secondary. You get a guy like DJ Reader at the defensive tackle spot, and here's what I mean in terms of helping the secondary. DJ Reader is not going to be the guy that's going to get all these sacks, but I do think he can be such a disruptive force in the middle that can free up your edge rushers, your Aiden Hutchinson, to just go nuts and try and get after that quarterback even faster, because if you're not going to allocate multiple resources towards a guy like DJ Reader, he can get so much interior pressure that maybe he doesn't get the sack, but at the very least, he can make the quarterback uncomfortable. So if you're going to start throwing double teams his way, which is probably the standard thing to do when it comes to a guy like him, that's leaving a guy like Aiden Hutchinson out on the edge to go one-on-one. So I think that even the DJ Reader addition can definitely help when it comes to overall that defense and trying to stop the pass. I don't know what their plan is going to be at safety, because ultimately they didn't really add much safety help, but they do have Brian Branch, who they drafted last year, and I believe it was Kirby Joseph opposite of him. So those two guys probably going to be the starters. We'll see if Brian Branch can continue to develop, because he was actually one of the few bright spots on that secondary last year. So, ultimately, I like what Detroit did in the offseason. It was nothing crazy, but as I've said for the Chiefs, as I've said for the Niners, when you have a really good team, usually your offseason's not going to be that nuts anyway, and I feel like they did a good job addressing their biggest weakness and also bringing in potential kneecap biter in DJ Reader.
I forgot about that for a second, but Campbell's looking for those, and he's like you kind of alluded to, he's gotten them in Detroit. I mean, I'll just go quickly on the offense. We know the line's good, and once again, even though they lost Jonah Jackson, like we mentioned, brought in Kevin Zeitler, experienced veteran, and even if maybe Zeitler or someone else gets injured, don't worry, knocking on wood for you, Detroit fans, we know the rest of that offensive line is still good enough that it can kind of cover that hole in regards to obviously Penei Sewell, Decker, Ragnow, trio, and then Graham Glasgow on the other side. Interested to see if we can finally get the Jameson Williams season that some of us Jameson Williams believers have been expecting, and it was encouraging because the end of last season, remember that playoff game, he made a couple of plays as well. So, and now he's obviously removed from that ACL injury, and then remember last camp too, if I remember correctly, he also had an injury. So, if I haven't got any notifications on him because obviously I haven't in a fantasy league. So it seems like he got through this training camp healthy, and it'll be interesting to see just if he can add kind of that 1-2 punch on the outside, just like they have in the backfield as well. Because that feels like that's like one of the only things that the Lions were missing was someone other than Amon Ra to throw to. Which once again, that's no offense to it, not really regarding Sam Laporta because he was awesome last year too, and it'll be interesting to see if he can keep that up from last year, or even improve. So, yeah.
I mean, even to your point there, though, like Laporta and Amon-Ra kind of also operate in similar spaces on the field. They never had like that true deep threat.
Yes, yeah, true boundary guy that's gonna especially scare you with speed as well, which we know he has, Jameson Williams. So, yeah, in regards to the defense, I am more. Only thing I am worried about is the other edge rusher not named Aiden Hutchinson. Right now, it's Marcus Davenport, who has been a guy that has had potential, but also been dealing with injuries. So who knows if that's been affecting it? But obviously, this is his third team, so we'll see how it goes there. I mean, like you alluded to, though, we saw last year it was still good enough. And yeah, I like DJ Reader also. So yeah, in the run game they'll still be good. And they still have these other solid D linemen, McNeil, Levi and Ruzarike, guy I liked, and then further development too of Jack Campbell, year 2 of him being the guy at inside linebacker for them. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this young secondary fares. But the fact that the front 7 is, especially the front 4, is really solidified and kind of proven, especially Hutchinson and Reader. Yeah, I feel like it's going to be hard for Detroit to not follow up with another great year because like one of the reasons I think many of us have fallen in love with them is they've kind of built from the ground up and they have a really good base on both lines, solid both lines, good ideas, a coach that's obviously willing to take risks and is obviously a great inspirer as the Lions, who would have thunk it, probably five years ago, you can even say, or pre Dan Campbell, this was that they were always in the gutter and always, for the most part, everyone put them there, rightfully so. So we'll see if they can build upon last year and follow up with a back-to-back NFC North crown.